The fun thing is, I like coffee and I like geography. So, what mad person decided to put them together? Well, Kit did, of course. I'm Sean Ferry from Track Culture, and you're listening to the Coffee and Geography podcast. Grab yourself a brew, enjoy the listen, and just have a generally good time. And if you don't, try again. Thanks very much.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Coffee and Geography podcast. I am not just joined in the coffee house by my wonderful guests, Willem Buttinger. Hello, welcome to the Coffee and Geography coffee house. So you're sitting on here with this table in front of the camera. And just over there, you can't see them on camera, folks, but they're going to give me a wave. We're actually joined by Eileen and Lydia at Willem's table. So yeah, it's the first time I think we've actually had people listening into a recording, which is fantastic. It's not making you nervous, Willem, at all, is it?
No, not at all. I'm quite used to having in-depth conversations with both of them, and they will both give me valid feedback, I'm certain. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's it. So yeah, that lovely family, like critical love. Yeah, there's no one harsher than a member of the family, really, is there?
Absolutely.
But they do it through love. So to introduce them, folks, so inspired by the groundbreaking 1972 Club of Rome report, Limits to Growth, Willem committed himself to environmentalism, joining Friends of the Earth to advocate for a more sustainable future. Well into retirement, he moved to Norwich in 2015 and found a vibrant community of like-minded individuals. And this sparked a new chapter of activism, organising climate and sustainability events, and even running for office as a Green Party councillor. I did not know that about you. And of course, you are one of the wonderful climate ambassadors that we have here in the east of England. So, you went for the running. So, what council did you go for?
It was it's in Norwich. It was Town Close, but it wasn't a target. It wasn't a target ward, so I wasn't expected to get anywhere. And all the canvassing was done in Nelson Ward. Yeah.
Yes. Well, I'll tell you what. That's really interesting, because that's a link between me and you, because when I was a high school teacher, we used to in the old days of fieldwork, of coursework, we used to take the year 11s for their urban fieldwork. So of course, for their physical fieldwork, we took them to the Norfolk coast. Of course we did. But for their urban fieldwork, we did stuff about sustainable development and urban development and socio-economic measures. And do you believe it or not, where did we go? We went to the Golden Triangle, and particular that area of Town Close in Vauxhall Street, and all behind that housing there. So along Dover, so not the Dover Street side of Unthank Road, but the other side of it, where you got the block of flats and the mini shops and stuff like that. Yeah, that was the kids' study area. So every year for about 10 years.
Yeah. So I live in Park Lane, which is off Unthank Road in the Golden Triangle.
Yes, folks, if you're listening, and you're thinking, what, Park Lane? You mean the second most expensive part of the Monopoly board? No, folks, not that Park Lane. Not Park Lane in London, Park Lane in Norwich.
No, I was shocked when I'll tell you this, I was shocked when I moved here, because I come from London, out on the North Downs, and how scruffy the area was. Yeah, so Park Lane, got weeds and that growing out the pavement of things, but it's a wonderful, vibrant area. But that took me a few years to discover.
Yeah, I tell you what, it's lovely. We always had a lovely time there, and there were people willing to talk to the students with their work. And I don't know who the person was, the name was, but there was one time when Town Close did have a Green Party councillor, and for a few years running, she actually joined us on the field trip and talked to the kids about stuff in town. I can't remember. I wonder if it was actually Catherine Rowett, because I know Catherine Rowett.
I know Catherine.
Councillor?
She was. I think she's been everything. She's been an MEP.
She has been everything. I know you. I know Catherine. So I'm so sorry, Catherine. I apologise. I can't remember if it was particularly you who used to talk to our students, but for me, Willem, that was another life ago. That was so. I've moved on since being a high school geography teacher. Right. So we'll come back to what you mentioned a minute about moving from London to Norwich, but we're here in the coffee house. So what have you grabbed? What do you usually grab from the bistro when you come to a coffee shop?
Well, I mean, let me start at home, because I've got an insight to share which might be useful. So,
yes, please.
There's normally red, this one, but I've got decaf and ordinary, now full fat. Now, what I do, I mix 50-50, right?
Oh
So
yeah,
it means I can have 4 cups of coffee and only 2 cups worth of caffeine.
I
So
gotcha. I gotcha.
yeah,
I can see there over on the other table, Eileen's like laughing at this. It's just like, yeah, you're a pain in the backside, mate. No, but yeah, it's I can see it, and that was that Lavazzo. I think you had the brand, I think, which
the
is
so well, I find
yeah, yeah,
it's in terms of value for money.
yes.
It's we get the quality, but it's not extortionate. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, yeah. So what we'll do, folks, as your regular listeners to the podcast know, we will put Lavazza on the Coffee and Geography coffee map, and then
Yeah.
you can use it to see what their sustainability credentials are or what they claim to be. Right. So moving on to your geographical identity, then. So very interesting, then. So another thing we've more loosely got in common now is moving up from further south up to Norwich. So my personal journey, I come from the North London, South Essex area, so Harlow and Epping in Essex, and
Yeah.
then moved up to Norwich to be a student at the University of East Anglia. So you're also from London, a different part of London. So yeah, tell us a little about your journey and your experiences from London to Norwich, and how have these two places or other places that you've experienced, how have they formulated the person that you are today?
Well, that's a really big, a really big question. But okay, one of my drivers is always community, right? So a lot of my work has always been in trying to develop local communities. And so when I was living in Kenley, which is a famous place in terms of Battle of Britain airfield, just on the borders of London, up on the North Downs, yeah.
Right.
So I worked hard in my retirement to do activities that help develop the community there. So, but the thing is, the environmental movement wasn't strong and big. Then when I met Eileen, I moved to Norwich and married her, and we got married. We moved into Park Lane. We renovated in 2016 a house that is in this house that I'm sitting in now, which was completely derelict, a terrible state. And then in 2017, it's the sort of sliding doors principle of life, which you're aware of, yeah. So Aviva sent us a renewal for our insurance premium. It went up 300%, and I thought, bloody hell! So I phoned up the call centre, and the call centre said, "Oh, yes, because of flood risk." Well, I said, "We're a mile and a half from the river." "Oh no," they said, it's surface water flood risk.
Of
And so
course.
I went onto the Environment Agency website, and yes, parts of Park Lane are now are at high risk. And so then I started taking a lot more interest in climate change. Also, we've done our work, and then the first event I organised was in 2020. So
Wow.
that's my journey.
So that's really interesting, because as an educator, both as a school educator working with young people, but also later on as a climate educator and things like I do. One of the things that I've used frequently are like the Environment Agency's flood maps, flood risk, and because I thought it was my responsibility to not just teach good geography, but my responsibility to teach resilience. So,
Yeah.
let's have a look at the flood risk in our area, and then talk about what we could do to build resilience, to mitigate that, all that kind of stuff. So I thought I was actually teaching more citizenship PSHE rather than geography, because I felt it was a very important thing to talk about. But then to hear that kind of process actually formulated your identity, but also your geography, where you ended up. That's I've never ever thought that something like an official flood map could actually have had that such profound impact on someone.
Yeah.
That's
So
actually quite interesting.
also because I tell you, it's because it was local and Norwich, and I could identify already with Norwich as a community. Yeah. So really, it was galvanized, thinking, haha, I can do something here, which I couldn't do in a place like
Yeah.
London. And this really has motivated me, the sense that Norwich is a place where it has everything that you want, but it's no bigger than that. It's a place you can hold in your hand and really think about it as an entity. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's really interesting. So so folks, what I'm going to do now, I'm going to switch to a tab, and this is actually really, really fantastic, right? So this is I mean, it's changed a lot, hasn't it, since we used to use the first iteration, and then when you moved up to Norwich, it was slightly different. But so this is where I used to live when in my second year at university. I moved into student accommodation, 20 Dover Street, so just across the road from where you are. And it gives this summary. So that particular address is very low chance of surface water and from the rivers and seas, because that part of Dover Street is on a bit of a slope anyway. So you're not likely to have that. But the other thing as well, folks, is that you can actually access a map as well, and they've changed this slightly to not make it so simple. But you can actually access a map off here as well. So I might need to kind of like edit and cut this bit out in order to kind of go ahead and do that. But yeah, so and I know because we were at an event together. I think was it at East Norfolk Sixth Form College? I think
that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, and you had all of these maps printed out, flood maps. So yeah, so let's take while I'm searching for this for the people who can see it visually. Tell us a little bit about then. Okay, you thought, right, not only is this really impacting kind of like me, my well-being, I'm now understanding things like the impacts on insurance, even in an area which I never would have thought was at flood risk. Why did you then turn around and say, I think this is something that more people need to know about, that this is essential for people to understand? I mean, we use the term climate literate to be almost flood literate. So yeah, what went through your mind then?
Well, I suppose, I mean, I'm retired, so I'm always looking for something interesting to do, and I like to influence. So in other words, I mean, it's why I organise events, and everything that I do is like to influence people about the ideas that I have, the things that I think are important. So and I love organising things as well. I mean, so I find that, which is very stressful. I will say, I'd much rather sometimes had a little shed at the bottom of the garden and just and do something with my hands. But I'm not built that way.
Right. So no, I mean, yeah, I'm sort of kind of the opposite, because of my ADHD brain, I kind of feel like I have to be doing something with my hands or something like that. But which is probably why I spend so much time on computers, because I've tap away. But yeah, I remember you talking to the youngsters on that particular event, and that was really, really interesting about the way that you were getting them to have a look about where they're situated. And the thing that I used to so this was really interesting, and you'll like this story actually. So the school that I used to teach at was on the top of a hill. In fact, it's people really want to find out where I taught, they can use this information to find out. It was actually located near the second highest point in Norfolk, with the highest point in Norfolk being somewhere along Cromer Ridge near the Norfolk coast, right? So of course, when I used to do these flood mapping exercises, they'd all say, oh, our school's all right, my house is all right, and stuff like that. I was like, okay, right, stop. We live on the second highest part of Norfolk. Okay, yeah, so fine. So we're gonna be all right from surface water flooding, probably. We might have a few dips in the road where it'll get fine. Okay, and then down to the Taz Valley, there's obviously going to be problems there. And I'm like, okay, go through a typical week. Right, so obviously going to school, to and from school. Right, so first question is, will you be able to get to and from school? Okay, so now a few more I'm all right Jacks start to question it. Yeah. What about, where does your parents work, or where does your family work? Oh dear. Okay, right. So they can't get to work, or work is flooded. Right. Okay. Right. Okay. What about when you do shopping? Because there's apart from the Budgeons up the road, there's nothing around here, is it? So, how many of you go to the Tesco's on the Hall? Can't get the Tesco's, right? Okay. Sainsbury's on Pound. No, that's gone, right? So now all of a sudden you start going through the logistics of a week life, and they suddenly realise, oh dear, there is not a single soul in this classroom that is not impacted by flooding, even though their house might be all right, their school might be all right, and maybe other elements of their life be all right. They are all impacted. I said, yeah, Budgeons is not underwater. Okay, where's Budgeons going to get their deliveries from? So, and that's I took
that's good. Yeah.
I took morbid joy in that kind of way of exploring things.
Yeah.
So I've managed to find that surface water map now, folks. So actually, I'll put that up on the screen for folks who are watching this visually, and you can see all of these blue dots on the screen here are parts of Norwich, and this is the particular place where we were looking at here. All of these places here in Norwich, you can see, are at risk of surface water flooding. Now, surface water flooding is basically where the water accumulates to such an extent that it can't drain away quick enough, maybe because there's potential old drainage networks, or there's lack of sustainable drainage, or the way that the land undulates, and so it ends up in a dip and it can't drain away, or maybe it's so close to the water table that if the ground gets saturated enough, it doesn't take too much for the water to build up over the surface. So that's what we call surface water. And as Willem just said, folks, you don't need to be anywhere near a river for it to have this problem. Okay, so you can absolutely quite rightly see. So here's Dover Street, where I used to be, and you can see here, folks, all of these patches of land that are not just light blue but dark blue as well. So yeah, have you ever experienced any surface water flooding then William, yourself? Have you seen it for yourself and its impacts?
No, but I've seen certainly Earlham and Untanked roads being sort of flooded, with water running down. There are one or two houses locally that have got floodgates already, so they're really prepared for it.
Really?
Oh yeah. They have.
I did not know that.
So if you look on Earlham Road, if you go to West Parade, which is the next road along towards the city, West Parade, they are at most probably lowest point. So the way to think about this part of, it's not a perfect bowl, but there are a lot of hills, as you know, from Dover Street. So the water all rushes down to this area where you can see in the middle there, which is all that dark blue. Now, fortunately, we are on the right side of the street. This is a new map. It says now medium charts. Our neighbours in the other side are high risk.
That's really interesting.
But what the underwriters do, you see, is they see this map and then they draw a bigger circle around it. And also what impact's going to have on house prices. Yeah, because people will look at flood risk maps and say, well, I don't want to live on Park Lane. It looks a bit too dodgy. So, and I'm serious. Well, yes, it just will happen. And also getting a mortgage.
Yes, and folks, these are the consequences of a changing climate, which a lot of people are not aware of. And so when people say, "Oh, climate change," it doesn't matter if they don't believe on it, or if they do believe in it, they don't care. It really doesn't matter because if anybody's risk is increasing because of climate change, there's going to be a knock-on impact on everybody else. So as William's just said, folks, just because maybe according to this map, his house might not be particularly at risk or is at low chance at risk, then an insurance company is going to cover their backsides basically because they're a business. Yes, they're there to safeguard people, but really they can't run at a loss, right? So at the minimum, they're going to run at a minimal profit, right? So they're not just going to turn and say, oh, if you're at that property right there, right next to this sports facility, we're going to charge you 3,000 and charge your next door neighbor 1,000. Doesn't work like that. It doesn't work like that. They work in radii. They work in kind of zones, if you like. That's why they call them flood zones, risk zones. So and it could be pot luck whether you're in one zone or another. And then there's, of course, the whole debate, Willem, as you well know, about inequality and things like that, about people who are disproportionately at higher risk and can't afford the higher insurance and all that kind of stuff. And that's a discussion for another day. So, yeah, I mean, before we move on, I mean, do you have any other thoughts and feelings about kind of like this whole, it's almost a climate justice issue, isn't it? In a way.
Yeah. Well, if I chunked upwards, and I did put this as one of the questions. I said we're all buggered unless we adopt a new story for our civilization.
That's right.
And human beings run by stories, and the old story about we can exploit the environment. We all know that story is dead, but we still haven't given up the story of economic growth on a finite planet.
Yes.
And we need a story about nurturing the planet and seeing it as something we protect and cherish, we're still not there. Well, we've moved on hunting, so we don't see hunting animals, so we can change the story. And if the story changes, right, then we can change as human species very fast. And I always like the analogy of the Berlin Wall. 6 months
Oh,
before,
yes.
how long's the Berlin Wall going to be there? I'll be there for decades. And communism, yeah, be years and years. Then suddenly in 6 months, not only the Berlin Wall goes down, communism collapses. You see a new idea or a new story can capture the imagination so quickly and just change things overnight. So I see it's my job not to force people, push people, cajole people to change their habits so much as get them to adopt a new story.
Yeah, I really, really love that. And there's a fellow climate ambassador who really embodies that like you do, and that's Dr. Adrian Cooper. So folks, if go and listen to that chat between me and Adrian about 6 episodes ago, and he's exactly the same way. In fact, that kind of leads quite on nicely to one of the other talking points that you had here, Willem, about learning from kind of what have you learned from events, but particularly in terms of organizing things, being part of a collaborative effort, being part of a community. Because one thing that Adrian will sings high heaven about is community-based action and community leverage and things like that, and he's actually helping local schools in his area in Felixstowe with a community-based approach to their climate action plans, and they're achieving a lot more than they thought they would. So yeah, I mean, I think this is a great opportunity for you to talk about that bit about what have you learned from like community-based events, collaborative events that you've been a part of or been organizing.
Yeah, so I believe I believe in being realistic and looking at the evidence, right? So if I look at the evidence, and we've got six events since 2020. I tell you, the amount of effort that's gone into these events has been enormous. But the big problem is getting bums on seats, right? People
Yes.
aren't that interested in climate change. They know about it, but they don't really want to engage. You go down the pub, they're not interested. Yeah, I send them links to videos, invite them, and I spend a lot of time. So so I feel there's a long way to go, and that's why I believe it's about suddenly a new story will come and hopefully then sweep over us. But I think if we've got an uphill struggle, even at like the college and going into the schools, they might show some interest in nodding, but they go home. I honestly don't think. I think we've got a much bigger battle than perhaps we realise.
Yeah, and that's kind of my sense as well through the work that I've been doing, not just through this job as the Climate Bus Regional Hub Manager for the last year and a bit, but pretty much for the last 20 years, for the couple of decades, right into when I started becoming a high school teacher, that I felt very, very quickly that and folks, this is the Coffee and Geography podcast, so of course I'm going to big up geography quite a lot, right? But it's through training as a geography teacher and then teaching geography that I realized that if it's done well and it's done properly and it's done from the heart and it's done genuinely and honestly with integrity, it can change people's lives and it can really activate people and it can really empower people to make a difference within their lives and within their community. So I used to approach my teaching in that respect, and there are lots of ex-students now who I still in contact with and speak to me who actually have been movers and shakers with whatever realm they've gone into, and it's been really heartening to see that, and for them to turn around and say things like, Kit, if it wasn't for if I didn't have you as a teacher, and they would name a couple of other teachers who had similar inspiration for them, I probably wouldn't be doing what I'm doing or feel this way. And you say about stories, there's one particular young person, I'll mention her because she's been on the podcast a few seasons ago. So Johanna, who's wonderful ex-student of mine, who's now up in Sheffield, having done, I think she did a degree in environmental science, I believe. But you can listen to the chat, folks. And one thing we talked about on our chat was she almost felt paralyzed by climate anxiety, absolutely paralyzed from it. And she said that one of the things that she feels helped her through was the knowledge and understanding that came from learning about the issue, but also as we want is the positive sustainable actions and solutions and community-based actions that can be done about it. So she was talking about how she's involved in projects regarding the, I think it's like the B Corp certification thing, where you can get agencies, companies to become B certified, where they put, and so that was a small kind of grassroots effort that has become really, really big and is now influencing company policy. And she felt that was a very, very important thing, like just being part of that small pebble to start that process with things in her area. So, and again, you see that story. So what did I go? I went straight into telling a story of an ex-student. And where we met, we had a lovely chat when we first met. If you remember, William, which was one of the events that you were a part of, was the Norwich site event at the Norwich Forum. So,
right.
Yeah, and we had a lovely chat, and that's how we first met. And that did its best to try and gather to people, a load of different group of people. So we had Asher and myself there from the Tyndall Centre, John Boone, who I also know, the architect, who I also knew because I used to be in an office opposite him at the Enterprise Centre at UEA. We had Nova from the Norfolk Chambers of Commerce, Matt Williams from the flood and geologist from the Floods and City Infrastructure Resilience Group, Saul Humphrey, who's amazing about sustainable development and zero carbon projects. So these kind of events, which do involve people from businesses and organizations that have a kind of bit of clout to their role, really passionate about these things. I mean, how essential are these? Are they worthwhile doing? I mean, how did you feel coming away from that event?
Right. So the two things, positive and a negative. The positive, it did bring everybody together, and that was the first time, and so that was excellent. And in that way, it's far better than any of the previous events I've been involved with. But events I've been involved with before, well, either by myself or with Norwich Friends of the Earth. So that was very good. And one outcome from that was that the Norwich City Council, after Green Council representation, declared Norwich a sponge city, i.e. basically dig up the hard surfaces and allow the water to drain away. Yeah, so sponge city. So that had an effect. The downside, it's difficult for people to realize how much work went in to try to fill that auditorium. Yeah, it wasn't full. What a struggle it was. And so even getting councillors to go, so it's about their city. The biggest threat to Norwich is climate change, is water. We've got two rivers, surface water flooding. We've got the sea coming closer, making an estuary, and yet they still talk about the East Norwich master plan, building 10,000 houses or something.
Yes, which is quite antithesis to becoming a spongy city, because none of these housing developments have got sustainable drainage systems integrated into them. And by definition, if you build on a greenfield site, folks, you're affecting how the water drains off of it. So I did hear about that spongy city thing, but apart from it being a big announcement at that thing and then a press release in November 2024, I haven't heard anything since. And because we've got two climate ambassadors from Anglia Water who talk a lot about sustainable drainage, and at Norwich Science Festival we had Anglia Water lent us their sustainable drainage system demonstrating tank, which was brilliant. And so that was absolutely fantastic. But it's not going at the pace I feel like. That was a really great event, but I agree with you. We came away from that event, and then I just feel that there didn't seem to be there seemed to be a willingness, but not an urgency, and you need both, because the pace of change is far outstripping the action that we are taking.
Can I come in on that? Because so the first event I organised was the Norfolk Climate Change Conference, and there's it's recorded, is on YouTube, and one of the speakers, you no doubt know, was Hayley Pinto. Yeah, you know her. Yeah, she's a psychiatrist. So she did the first opening slot on that, and she talks about why we responded to COVID, but we can't respond to climate change. Right?
Yes.
Yeah, and we emotionally respond as human beings to something like COVID. Yeah, it's in our DNA to respond to pandemics and diseases. Yeah, but we are not equipped mentally. It's not our fault. Evolution didn't equip us to deal with something like climate change, an existential, slow-burning risk, and that is the problem. So that is again why it's only by changing the story. The story will we go?
Yep.
Yeah, it's the only way to do it. Yeah.
Yep.
That's it.
So,
well
folks,
done.
I will. Yep. So I will put the link to the recording of the conference, folks, in the description, so you can have a look at that. Yeah. In fact, you've got this wonderful webpage from the Campaign to Protect Rural England, the Norfolk branch. So it gives a good overview of the conference, and then you've got a button there where you can go and watch the recording. So I'll make sure that that goes into that. Yes, I remember that Rupert Reed was part of that as well. So yeah, and here are the talking points that you had, and you were talking about Haley and the reaction to COVID. And there was so much talk, wasn't there, about as we were coming out of COVID, I was like, maybe this is it. Maybe this is the sea change that we need.
Exactly.
And it was just, and you look at almost every measure, every statistic, which is part of the problem which we alluded to about measuring of economic systems, where we did something like this and then just straight back up to it again. Whatever measure, it could be economic, could be carbon emissions, whatever it was, we just went, it's like, oh, we had a chance, so. But at least it was, COVID wasn't beneficial to anybody. But it was. We unfortunately, a friend of mine, his wife passed away from COVID, and I just feel it shouldn't. Yes, you're right. The human psyche means it are shocks like that, isn't it? Which causes the humans to react. The boiling frog syndrome, isn't it? It's and yet, yeah. But I still have hope, and I'm segueing here. I still have hope. Because of folks like yourself, folks like your wife and your daughter Lydia, who I'll say again, Lydia, we will get you on the podcast next season, from what you told me about yourself. And yeah, is the work that you are trying to do. And one thing, Willem, is that when I first started this post, I was optimistic, I was excited, but I was also dreading it, because I am someone who is so enthusiastic and I spend a lot of energy on things that I'm passionate about.
Not
and
kidding.
I thought this could be I know, and this is something which I know I could burn myself out with. But as time has gone on and the frustrations with running a project take place, and as you say, the frustrations with schools which just won't communicate, won't buy it, or people are just not, I've actually felt very, very empowered and very positive on the back of what I've been doing. I'm not saying that we're well on the way to solving climate change, but I feel better about the people involved, because the amount of collaborations that I have through the other sister projects that we are involved in, the other regional hub managers for the other parts of the Climate Ambassador Scheme, the climate ambassadors that I work with, and their desire, like yourself, at least I'm not feeling alone anymore. At least I'm feeling there are people out there who are doing everything they can. And I really do honestly believe we are getting closer, and I hope we get there soon enough, but we are getting closer to that critical point where there's a big sea change, and I feel better because of people like you out there. So the Climate Ambassador Scheme there, well, it must have been a perfect fit for you. I mean,
I saw it.
Yeah, tell me. I mean, why did you go like, this is for me?
Okay, so the thing is, I already had some experience. I had been in the school, City of Norwich school, to help run a lesson on climate change. I have given a talk, and I've done so much research. And to some extent, I felt a bit like an imposter, STEM. I'm not science at all, climate ambassador. But I thought, well, let's see, because you don't need an expert to go into schools. At that level, and I don't at all. And in fact, I do reading, help with reading at a primary school. So I have some connection with children that age, and I know that I have an affinity with them. Yeah. So I know that if I'm passionate enough, and of course, now since then, one of the things I'm doing is a library of images, which I'm paying for to have often laminated. so that I can go into schools, because images speak 1,000 words, and having cartoons and things rather than hard science images and graphs and things. Yeah. So I've got now a library of images I've generated, which I'm happy to share, but to use in the being a climate ambassador. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's and you've done so much as well. You've just continuing the work that you've been doing already,
Yeah.
but you've been using that climate ambassador kind of badge to really, really good effect. And you've also been helping out. You've also been willing to buddy with some schools who've been reaching out for help in particular. So which has absolutely been fantastic. And now we're starting to feel, because of efforts like yourself, I'm now starting to get schools to come to us and actually turn and say, we are now starting to get a sense that we need to do this, but that there is help out there. And it's been a slow burner, but now we're really getting to this point where actually there seems to be a real sea change in this. And there is enough staff in each school who can see the wood for the trees now. And so I just, without volunteers like yourself, Willem, well, it would just be me for 3,000 schools in the east of England. That's an impossible job. So
yeah.
And the other thing that you do, you're such an advocate and such an activist with this kind of stuff. You're not afraid to put your voice out there. And there was one thing that you sent to me, which you got published one of your letters in the EDP, in the Eastern Daily Press. So I just want to put this on the screen to folks. And it was just so lovely, and we loved it so much that the central team, the national team, the Climate Ambassadors national team said, "Oh, we're going to share this. We're going to repost this." So go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
Can I admit there's one mistake in it. So right, so land warms up twice as much as right? Yes, we accept that. So as I typing away, so global warming, so we're at 1.3 degrees, so land's warmed up 1.5 degrees, so land's warmed up by 3 degrees. No, because the average, it doesn't how it work. The maths, the equation doesn't work. It's not quite so much. So that is a mistake that is in there. But anyway, so spot the mistake.
That's those kind of. We're not expecting. So, folks, Willem and I are not expecting, all schools, all teachers, all people to have that granular knowledge. That's not what we mean by climate literacy. So that's a forgivable mistake, because it is true that land can warm up much quicker than oceans, because the oceans have the ability to absorb heat, which is you hear that all the time in the news, that the oceans are absorbing more heat than they ever have done in the past, and they also absorb carbon, whereas ground doesn't have that much of a capacity. It does absorb heat, but if the way that we're changing the land use, and we're changing things like albedo and stuff like that, that's for another time. It can have more drastic effects. And here's a really good way of thinking about it, right? I mean, this is more weather than climate, but it's still the same mechanism. So I want you to think about going to the beach on a nice sunny day, right? And it's really, really sunny. That's the key thing. Very bright and sunny, not just hot. And if you step with bare feet on the sand, you could get your feet burned, right? But the second you put your foot in the ocean, it's pretty cold. It's pretty freezing, right? And that is so. It's to do with the fact that it's to do with scale as well. The ocean's very big, as well as so. But yeah, there's lots of complex things. But so you're right in general. On average, the land will warm quicker than the oceans. Right. So before we move on to a little bit more about yourself personally, is there anything else that you wanted to say regarding your work through climate change or climate ambassadors?
No, but the only other question, if you've got time or interest, is what will destroy civilization first, climate change or AI?
AI.
Right. I mean,
what do you think?
Well, so I only recently started looking at AI, and unfortunately, I'm retired, so I've got a little bit of time to research this. But and just to say, it's not me saying this. These are the former head of Google, some called Schmidt, and also the former the chap who won the Nobel Prize for the Nobel Prize for AI, a chap called Hinton, and both, multiple YouTube clips with these people, and they are saying there is a real risk that AI will eventually run itself, will program itself and prove itself, and both go basically AWOL. And
it's like the movie Terminator.
Yeah, so it because humans will lose control of it, and as it integrates, and we use it because there's a competitive race to use it, right? With China and that. As we integrate it into all of our processes, our arms industry, our nuclear power, our telecommunications, our health service, then the ability of AI, it's already been proven it will deceive. In the pursuit of its goals, it will deceive humans. It will lie. And if it wants to pursue certain goals, it might decide, well, humans are bloody irrelevant to the goals that it wants to pursue. And it might release pathogens and disrupt all our technological society. So we need guardrails. And I think the positive side is that it's a bit like the nuclear arms industries. I think that's a race. That's the best analogy. There has been control. Humanity has, to some extent, controlled the arms race on nuclear weapons, and that is what's needed with AI. But otherwise, it's a speed. It's a speed. Also, just an analogy. Climate change is moving faster. Yeah, everything you read, if you're up to date, is saying it's moved faster. They're talking about 2 degrees now by 2035.
Yes.
Yeah, I've got serious podcasts on this, and they talk about AI. They're talking about now thousands of jobs going within the next year or two, and then becoming super intelligent. AI becoming super intelligent because they're staggered how fast this is happening.
Yeah,
it's fast.
Yeah, I think the crux of the issue is what you said. Is the pace of change. So, we've had artificial intelligence as a mechanism for a long time now, and we've lived with it for a very long time, in ways that people don't really think of artificial intelligence, whether it is, programming, suggesting optimal times to program your thermostat to come on at a certain time, so we've had artificial, but the way that, the artificial intelligence that we consider the existential threat, like is shown in, I don't know what it was about the 1980s about nuclear war and AI, but you had the Terminator movies. You had one of my favorite movies growing up was War Games. I don't know if you remember that one, where they forced the computer to play tic-tac-toe to make sure it didn't cause a nuclear war.
Matrix.
And the Matrix. That was supposed to be a bit later. So all of these things, they focus on these autonomous, self-regulating AIs. And it's a hell of a lot more complicated than that, but it all kind of goes down to these things you're saying about guardrails and it even though it might sound sensationalism, it is a valid question to say, if we turn to AI to solve the climate crisis, there is nothing to suggest that AI might not come up with a solution when it's, well, the cause of the climate crisis is human activity and existence of humans, and for me that goes back to one person who got me into environmental science was James Lovelock, and things like Gaia theory and stuff like that. And one of the things I like to use Gaia theory as an analogy more than anything else. So like he says, he's treating as global warming, climate change is almost like the Earth is putting on a fever in order to eradicate a disease. And in his mind, through Gaia theory, the disease is the human race, particularly capitalism and the economic structure that is feeding, because and then the Earth is reacting by heating up, a bit like our bodies would create a fever to try and get rid of to fight a virus. And I like that analogy. And if AI could be the potential medicine, if it's not regulated, yes, it might solve climate change, but how might it go about solving it? These are valid questions to ask. They may sound sensationalism, folks, but if you don't ask these questions, you can't safeguard against them. So thank you for bringing that up. Well, on that cheery note, let's move on to something a bit more cheery. So we'll do two last things very quickly. So we've only got a few minutes left.
Yeah.
So spinning the beans, and I know this is going to make your wonderful wife laugh, is because you said 2 years ago you were on a Zoom meeting and someone you didn't know sent you a private chat and said, my wife tells me that she went out with you 55 years ago when you was in London. And you said, talk about falling off someone's chair.
Yeah. So I never had that feeling of falling off a chair. But when I got a little chat on Zoom, and it says that my wife Dee says she went out with you 55 years ago, and this was in London, of course, yeah. And she's in King's Lynn, and she just happened to look at the screen, and of course she most probably didn't recognise my face particularly. But the one advantage with an uncommon name is, bloody hell, there can't be more than one Willem Buttinger in the world.
Right, yes.
And she was convinced it was me. And since then, we've met up as couples, and we get on really well. And it's just, I just love the anecdote. It's just wonderful.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah. When things like that happen, I mean, technology has really shortened the degrees of separation. That's for sure, in terms of who we know. And there are people I've got. Again, just a couple of days ago, another ex-student just emailed me via my UEA email address and says, hi, you might not remember me, blah blah blah, but I'm now in my mid-20s. You taught me in like 2006 or something like that. I'm like, whoa, this is like crazy. It's like 20 years later. Probably got kids of their own now. It's like, oh. Anyway, so that's pretty cool. Right, last thing then, Willem, is that we're going to connect you now to previous guests with our We Are All Geographers little game now.
Right.
So the last chat I had was, believe it or not, was Andrew Charlton Preston, Professor Andrew Charlton Preston, who is the co-lead of the Climate Ambassadors, one of the co-leads of the Climate Ambassadors scheme nationally. And so I managed to sit down with my boss. He's lovely though. I can't think of him as a boss. And we had a little chat. And so the word that he would like you to talk about for 30 seconds, just riff, however you want to go for it. He's given you the word forecast. Right. So the word forecast. So when I start the timer, Willem, you've got 30 seconds to just talk about the word forecast in any way, shape, or word that is okay for a family-friendly podcast. So tell me when you're ready and I'll start the timer. Right, so off we go. 30 seconds on the word forecast. Go.
Right. Well, quite a few years ago when I was at work, I was in the business of raising money to build social housing. And because of raising money, we're always being faced with forecasts about where the interest rates and things will go, economic forecasts. And I remember giving a talk saying, basically, what a load of bollocks all these forecasts are. If you look at what these forecasts said a year or two ago and what actually happened, you see they're completely unreliable. Blow me, I've only started. I mean, I was going to go on about climate change forecasts as well.
Yeah. Which, you could get me started on that on forecasts. So many people, especially my dad, takes the mickey out of me. He says, Kit, I could do a better job than you. You know, you call yourself a meteorologist and climatologist. Look, I could do a better job than you. It's raining. Thanks, Dad. Thanks. That was funny. That's not a joke that you said a million times before. You know, looking at wind, say, it's going to rain.
So one of the things I don't like about all the stuff I've seen, all the books, 35 books now read, they do very little tells you about the uncertainties in these models and about how they're put together. You know, they put it as and when you start looking at and questioning it, you'll be indicating. Yeah, so you and I had a little bit of had a correspondence on that, and I am also using ChatGPT to try to get sometimes to go down. You know, the graphs produced by IPCC. What the hell is going on? What does this actually mean? But these forecasts aren't as good, aren't as reliable. And if you go back to the 1980s when they were forecasting, and particularly for some of them, ExxonMobil about climate change, these chaps doing back of an envelope got it as right as the current forecasters.
Yeah. Well, as from a climatologist point of view, I mean, we call them projections rather than forecasts, but they are. Yeah, and I'm totally agree. I like from my climate science, one of the things I really do communicate about is what is actually meant by scientific uncertainty, and why that actually should build trust in the process rather than the opposite, because the word
Absolutely, yeah.
uncertainty gets toxified and
Yeah,
weaponized by nefarious people. Whereas actually scientists building uncertainty into their models is actually good scientific practice, not bad.
yeah,
But the way that these projections seem to be failing at the moment, not failing, but they seem
yeah,
to be quote unquote inaccurate at the moment, is that they seem to be under estimating the changes which are taking place rather than the opposite. So yeah, it's, as I say, we could have another hour to talk about that kind of stuff, but the IPCC is getting better in trying to communicate these kind of things. Their last assessment report, the fifth one, did a lot better job, and I've just been on some calls setting up with the, for the next assessment report, the seventh assessment report, and we're looking at making that a lot more accessible. Right, before I forget, Willem, the next guest is going to have a go at a word for 30 seconds. So do you have a word in mind that you'd want them to go for 30 seconds?
Yeah, hyphenated word, circadian rhythm.
Oh, right. Let me write that down before I forget. Circadian rhythm. Something I do not have right now because my sleep patterns are terrible.
Yeah.
Circadian rhythm. Excellent. Okay, that is in for whoever is our next guest. Right. So we've got another person who's joined the coffee table next door. But apart from maybe folks over there, have you got anyone else you'd like to say hi to or give a shout out to?
Well, no, the shout. So is Jazz Brooks from the UEA, the student. I mean, she organised the UEA Climate Week. I'm just overbowled by her enthusiasm, the amount of effort that she put in to organise that week. And one thing I think people like you and I and her are a useful discussion. What is the downside of having all this enthusiasm? Yeah. Have we ever noticed?
Yeah. No, she's wonderful, Jazz. Yeah, and it's such a privilege to have her at the UEA. Yeah, it really is. Yeah. Oh, that's a lovely shout out. Well, Willem, thank you so much for joining us here in the Coffee and Geography Coffee House. And folks, if you want to engage with Willem, obviously we get in touch via the Climate Ambassadors Scheme, and then I can put you in touch with Willem as well. Thank you so much for dropping by. It's been an absolute joy.
Thanks a lot. Thanks, Kit. Cheers then.
And that's a wrap for this episode of Coffee and Geography, folks. If you're itching to know more about the Climate Ambassadors' awesome work, visit www.climateambassadors.org. Don't forget to follow us on Blue Sky at geogramblings.com and use the CoffeeJogPod hashtag to stay in the loop. Submit your questions for our guests on LinkedIn or Blue Sky with hashtag JogQOverABrew. Keep exploring this amazing world, tackling climate action, and flexing your geography muscles. Stay curious, keep jogging, and keep making waves.